Recently I was scrolling Pinterest when I stumbled across this image. After clicking on it, the algorithm started showing me all these images, and they really inspired me to do a personal project again. So in this video I'm not making Minecraft RTX or Clash of Clans realistic. This time I'm creating a foggy, dark, dystopian scene in Blender, so let's get into it. I collected some reference and inspiration material using PureRef. It's the perfect software for making mood boards. Once I had a decent collection of images, I launched Blender and started sculpting some hills. My plan for the scene was to have a winding road in a foggy valley going towards some kind of gigantic structure. For the structure, I wanted to take inspiration from brutalist architecture. After I was happy with the hills, I made the road using a Bezier curve. I converted it to a mesh and applied a solidify modifier. I had to add some more hills in the distance to make the scene feel a little bigger. Now the structure. I imagined some kind of gigantic wall surrounding a few really tall concrete buildings. I just roughly blocked out the shape and then modeled some smaller objects that I could scatter on the towers later on to add some detail. By the way, these people standing in the background are just so I know the scale of the scene. I mean, if you look at this cube, you don't know how big it is, but if I add some humans for scale, it instantly becomes clear. I modeled a few different kinds of antennas and support structures. For the material, I used a texture from textures.com and built this node setup to make it procedurally change colors when the object is duplicated. For the walls and buildings, I used Substance Painter. I applied a concrete material and made the crevices dirty using a dirt generator. I put the number 4 onto the front to add a little bit of story. I added the square texture and played with the tiling count. After increasing the border width, it actually looked like there were windows. The towers obviously still need way more detail, but I'll do that when we're back in Blender. I sorted the small objects into different collections, so I could scatter them on the concrete buildings. But I also placed a lot of assets by hand. I added the scaffolding using an array modifier and hung some Bezier curves from the towers to make cables. I gave them a dark material. The buildings, however, looked a little too dark, so I applied an emission shader to an icosphere and scattered it on the buildings. Making curved roads in 3D can be difficult sometimes because the road markings don't always want to follow the road. But I found this workaround by extruding the middle faces of the actual road geometry and giving them a different material. I extruded a few more faces and made them all yellow. I wanted the asphalt to be a little wet, so I decreased the roughness and mixed in a noise texture. The towers were still way too dark, so I put some red lights between them and also added one outside the walls. The scene definitely needed a truck, so I added one. I turned on the headlights and used this node setup to create some volumetric lighting. I added a few twigs and leaves to the ground because there is probably no one who picks them up. Right now the scene still looks kind of empty. It needs some vegetation. Grass is extremely resource heavy when rendering, so I only selected the faces that are actually visible on camera. I also selected the area closest to the camera to scatter some higher quality grass assets, and then I scattered some lighter grass in the distance. Before adding trees and bushes, I had to do something about the atmosphere. When I was in New York City, I took this picture right after it had rained, and I wanted to go for something similar in this scene. I downloaded the free cloud generator by KV3D, who you should definitely subscribe to on YouTube. I put it into the scene and made the tip of the tower disappear into the fog. In the image that inspired me in the first place, there is this road sign, and I wanted to recreate that. I designed my own sign that says "Welcome to District 4", referencing the 4 on the big wall. I put my design on a plane, gave it 2 poles, and added some detail using a Musgrave texture. Then I finally filled the scene with some greenery. I planted some botanic bushes in the foreground and a lot of trees in the background. I was only looking from the camera's perspective when positioning the trees to avoid putting them in places where they won't be seen anyway. Every single tree adds to the render time in the end, so I had to keep the amount fairly low. I added some scaffolding to one of the hills to create some kind of outpost of the city. I gave it a cable and some antennas and planted a few more trees. I copied the outpost and added even more trees further in the background using a particle system on a plane, and I also copied it a few times in different places. I added some smoke to the towers as well as a helicopter flying around the city. I actually reused the headlights of the car to make the light on the helicopter. I also duplicated it. The very last thing I did was moving up the number 4 on the wall because it was barely visible after I added trees. Well, and that's basically it. I didn't create an animation this time because one frame took 45 minutes to render. Oh, and I've recently launched a Discord server, so if you've got any questions about the project or want to talk to me in person, just join the server and hang out. So here's the final result.